It's free. Just keep pumping, right?
My son is taking his first economics course, and I'm encouraged to hear the professor professing the greatness of Milton Friedman.
Oh, really?
That's good.
So it is free.
Amazing. Milton Friedman, no free lunch. That was his famous saying. Yeah, you know, it's astounding to me. My wife had an economics class, and apparently they're not teaching Maynard Keynes very much anymore, which I thought was a positive. But I don't know. Last person I talked to kind of had not a similar argument with a guy who was American Prosperity guy that said that in his opinion they still work. I'm like, well, I hope they're not, but I don't know. You know, if they're not, then all you got is Milton Friedman really in the modern era, and what's his name, Von Hayek. Who else you got to pick, right? It's not going to be what's his name from the New York Times. But anyway,
Also named Friedman.
Is it Friedman? I thought it was started with a K. I was thinking Krauthammer. It's not Krauthammer. Anyway, we are looking still at Mark, and I told him for spring I'll continue at Mark as long as everyone's happy looking at Mark. I don't know. I think we're still digging good positive things at it, and I hope we're not reducing because people are getting tired of Mark. But you know, I don't mind if you go and do another class, because when you come pick up, we'll be someplace in Mark still, and eventually we'll get to the end. But
All Mark all the time.
all Mark all the time. Eventually get to the end, and I'll do another gospel, another letter. What's a happiness to me is usually I have to rush through at the end, and I'm not rushing through. I'm just taking it at the same pace. So if you want to go faster, tell me. I'll do that. If you want to finish up Mark and get done with it, we can do that too. But you know, otherwise I'll just keep doing Mark. At least that way we'll finish a whole class and look and know the whole book, and that way, you know, Mark's a short one, right? So positive. I gave you a picture. Oh yeah, and I need to tell you this. I'll be gone. I'm going to Mexico next week, but I'll be back, and I've got lessons ready to go.
Cuba?
No, not Cuba, just Mexico. But then I'm going to
Abu Dhabi?
No, not Abu Dhabi. I'm going to Dubai, and then to Australia. So I'm supposed to be taking an airplane to Australia. It's not like an airliner. It's like a T6, so it takes time to get there because we got to go in short hops. So anyway, so there'll be no class on the 8th of February and the 15th, but we'll restart class after that. But I'm ready for next week too, so we'll be good to go. I gave you a map. I like giving maps. Maps are really fun. And also, I think this map, no, it may not have some of the magic. You know, it's really funny how the magic towns that disappear, that aren't on the maps, but they're in the gospel. Like that one. What was the one that we had? Which, by the way, I think it's Dalmatia. Anyway, it's one of the most important cities in the ancient times because it was the school of the Pharisaic, the school of Gamaliel in the Pharisaic viewpoint. We're going to learn about the school of Gamaliel. I think we hit it today. But remember, we are not finished with the argument. The argument, although we're starting a new point, we ended with the paradox, a paradox of the salt. Because the whole point, and I can't review the whole lesson before, but the question is right now, was who is in the kingdom? Who is in the kingdom? Because remember, the message was that Jesus at the beginning, the message is the kingdom of God is near. And so the question really is who is in the kingdom. We are going to learn how you get into the kingdom, right, eventually. But Jesus' answer is a child and purity. And then we get this thing about salt, the paradox of the salt, because salt can't lose its flavor. It's impossible because it's NaCl. So therefore, salt is always
Salty. Sodium chloride.
I mean, you can have impure salt, right? You can have salt with impurities in it. But guess what? Even salt with impurities tastes like salt.
Rock salt.
So I think this is really important because the paradox that we end with is not a completion, but rather a continuation. And I also had another thought. I've been looking I've been looking at a lot of when Peter speaks in the Gospel of Mark, and I've come to a little bit different conclusion, although it doesn't change any of the conclusions we had before. Remember, the turning point of Mark is in Mark 8. The huge turning point is when Jesus says, "Who do people say that I am?" And the obvious telos to that is, "You're God," right? And Peter says, "Well, you're the anointed one." And I said, well, you know, this was an unexpected turn. And I thought maybe Peter had, you know, what is our impression of Peter's conclusion? That is a really good thing, profound thing, right? I'm not so sure. I'm looking back at when Peter says something in the book of Mark, that usually he states an unstated telos that's wrong. He does it all the time. Every time he opens his mouth, he literally is saying the wrong thing. So I'm not sure, although the answer from a Markian and also from a point of Christ, that when he said, "Well, you're the anointed one," well, what does that mean? Immediately in the thoughts and minds of the Hebrews, when they say he's the anointed one. And also,
Ruler.
priest and king,
King or a prophet?
and doing what? What is a priest and king going to do?
He's going to be the
Free
Messiah.
the
He's
Jews.
going to
The
save
new
his people.
ruler.
Get rid of the Romans and
Well, yeah. You said, well, see, you got your blinders on. He's going to save his people. From what? From the Romans and the Greeks, right? That's the view. Remember the Zealots? Andrew's a Zealot party guy, right? So the Zealots are like, well, this Messiah is going to be, what was the last Messiah like? What was the Maccabees, the sons of Maccabees like?
Very militaristic.
They're soldiers. They were high priests and kings. They took their sword and they ran the Greeks out, right?
Right.
They didn't totally un-Greekize. They're still speaking Greek, but they ran the Greeks out, right?
Right.
And so what is the anointed one supposed to do?
Take up his sword and run the Romans out.
Take up his sword and run the Romans and the Greeks out, right?
Start with Herod.
See? And start with Herod. So what do you think, if you think about it that way, what do you think about Peter's conclusion?
It's not that far off.
Peter, you're an idiot, right? Now, like I said, it's very Markian because, you know, Mark wants you to conclude that Jesus is God, right? Theos. But Jesus is also the Son of Man, right? Those are unstated telos, and also that he is the Christus. Christus. These are unstated telos, right?
Then Jesus said, "Peter, you're the rock. You shall build the church."
Not in Mark. And this is really interesting.
But I don't,
Yeah,
yes, Peter said a lot of dumb things, wrong things.
right?
But in this particular utterance, Christ specifically says that, I mean, to me, it's a divine inspiration. It's not something Peter came up with on his own, which puts him back in the situation where he said dumb things.
Let's
I
look
mean,
back at Mark.
does he not say specifically, only God could have told you this?
Does anybody have Mark right away? Because I
Yeah.
dumped it out of my thing. Mark, look at 8 and read in Mark, what does it say right then about that situation? Mark 8, I think it's,
27 through.
27.
go ahead, read it.
And Jesus went on his disciples to the villages of Caesarea Philippi. And on the way he asked his disciples, "Who do people say that I am?" And they told him, "John the Baptist, and others say Elijah, and others one of the prophets." And he asked them, "But who do you say that I am?" Peter answered him, "You are the Christ." And he strictly charged them to tell no one about him.
In Matthew, now see, this is a real problem, okay? Mark is not a set of little stories and vignettes about Jesus. Mark is a logos to tell us. It's an argument to an unstated conclusion. That's the way Greek is. Matthew is also a logos to tell us. So what does that mean about pulling, for example, and I have no problem with comparison. There's nothing wrong with making some comparisons, right? Because we have similar instances in Matthew and in Mark, right? However, what does it mean if you are to juxtapose the two? What have you just done that is really bad?
Tried to say that they're both the same argument, they're arguing the same thing.
Exactly. Because the reason Mark brings out certain things is because Mark is trying to make a point in the Logos to tell us that is a little different than Matthew's. Matthew has a different audience, a different speaking. And I say, please compare. But when you're looking at them, that's just the way we're looking at Mark. You notice when we hit Mark and we hit Septuagint passages, right? What do? We go immediately to the Septuagint, to the Old Testament documents, and we look to see, because those are indicators, right? Now, if we ever had a quote from Matthew in Mark, what will we do?
Back to Mark.
We'd go to Matthew, right? If we had a quote in Matthew about Mark, right? Or in Mark about Matthew, or vice versa. But we don't. We don't. So, I just want to warn you, because remember, our view in English is we like to look at things like, oh, these are nice stories, but they're not really nice stories. They are a logos to tell us. Yes, ma'am?
Well, but it makes sense what you just said, because that Peter really had the wrong idea, because Jesus said, don't tell anybody. Because he didn't want more of these people, you know, making him king and what have you. And then when he tried to explain that he's going to, Mark says when he, you know, that he had to be put to death and then rise again, and Peter was, you know, don't go there, Peter said, and then Jesus rebuked Peter.
Yes.
Because Satan wanted Jesus to do that, avoid Calvary and just become a famous whatever.
Well, that's our conclusion, you know, but I don't think that's a wrong conclusion. I'm just saying that we will readdress this because I was looking very closely at the parable of the fig tree. It's really an allegory of the fig tree, but it's the parable of the fig tree when we get closer to Jerusalem in a few chapters. And I'll reiterate this, because when I began looking at everything Peter says in Mark, I came to a conclusion that every time he opens his mouth, he's wrong. We want to conclude that he's right in certain places because it fits our ideas, right? But I don't think it fits Jesus' ideas at all, right? Yes, ma'am.
I just want to ask, do you think that the people, that his disciples at least, understood whenever he said the Son of Man, which he says often, that he was referring to himself and that whatever they believed about him was included? I'm not saying this well. That if he said the Son of Man has to suffer and die and rise again, do they understand that he's talking about, it seems that they understand that he's talking about himself?
No, I don't think they understand at all.
I don't think they understand at all. And in fact, I think that's part of the tension in Mark. The tension is, you notice every time, I don't, you know, when Peter says you're the anointed one, I think most of the disciples are, yeah, you're the anointed one. And that's what they're arguing about, because when the anointed one comes into power, you know, I'm gonna get part of Judea, and I'm gonna get part of the Galilee, and I'll get part of, right? Right?
Well, when they arrest Jesus, even Peter's ready to get after it.
Yeah,
He's got
Peter,
his-
yeah, the dead dream, right? His dead dream. Jesus is going to be the anointed one. He's going to kick out the Romans, and they're capturing him, right? So he brings out it's not really a sword. It's his knife. Look, the first way you oppress people in the ancient world and in the modern world is you take away their weapons. That's why you take away their guns, right? And in the ancient world, they took away all their metal, right? And the way you oppress people is you take away their swords. So they ain't got any swords. They have fish knives. What's a fish knife look like, right? I mean, a modern one is nice, you can fillet things, but a fish knife in the ancient world is like a piece of metal that's like sharp, maybe even a piece of stone that's sharp, sticking out, right? So you can open up oysters. That's about all they're good for, right? And chopping the guts out of fish. So, you know, Peter brings out his fish knife. Oh! I mean, I wish we would look at these things a little bit more the way they're really written, because I think they, you know, I'm not saying they'd be Life of Brian, but I'm saying they'd be a little bit more humorous, and we catch the humor. I think there's really some strong humor in this that is very Greek, very sarcastic, you know,
So you wanna say a
sardonic.
sharp pointy thing?
What's that?
A sharp pointy thing, he pulls out a sharp pointy thing?
He pulls out the sharp pointy thing, and that's about all, you know, and they're laughing. Can you see them laughing? You know? We'll see more of this. Anyway, remember, we are asking the question, the big deal is, what is this Son of Man, what is this Christus God, what's he supposed to do? Jesus told them, right out, the Son of Man, who, no one said the Son of Man is the Christus, but right, that's our assumption. But whatever this Son of Man is, this guy's going to die, and then resurrect. And they still can't figure that out, right? And I agree. I don't think they know. They don't. It's an unspoken tell us, and they don't get it. See, that's the tension in Mark. So now we are traveling. We are traveling toward Jerusalem. This is where we go. In 1, this is 10:1. Jesus then left that place and went into the region of Judea and across the Jordan. Now, across the Jordan is really important because who was across the Jordan in this area? Any idea? John the Baptist. John the Baptist was specifically at Bethany. So we don't know exactly where Jesus went, but he's going down the Jordan. Why is he going down the Jordan? If anybody ever read my book, Centurion, that's the way to go. Because otherwise you have to go through the Escadron, you have to go through the coastal plains, or you have to go through the mountains. And both are really bad places to go. So you go down the Jordan. He's on the opposite side of the Jordan, which is in Perea, which, by the way, is Greek. Decapolis, Perea, all this area. So Jesus left that place, and that place was, and I don't think we were up near Capernaum and the Sea of Galilee. Again, crowds of people came to him. Now this is really interesting, because where do these guys come from? Crowds of people in this area would have to be 2 or 3 regions. They would be from
Decapolis?
They would be Decapolis. Well, probably more, although I don't disagree. But if they're pre and Decapolis in that area and across the Jordan on that side, on the eastern side of Jordan, they are what nationality? Greeks or Zealots. And John the Baptist is on that area because he's trying to stay away from, well, the Romans mostly. Because remember, the Romans control Pilate at this time. Pilate stays most of his time, and isn't it funny? They have Caesarea, but that's Caesarea Maritima. So Caesarea Maritima is where, that is in Judea, and that's where Pilate spends most of his time. He only comes down to Jerusalem, if you read Centurion, he only comes down to Jerusalem during the festivals to keep order there. Although we believe they may have left Legion, part of the Legionnaire, a couple of the big groups. What are they called? What's that? Cohorts, yes, the cohorts, the groups of centurions, centuries. So, let's see. He taught didasco, and that was his custom, it says. The Lego is still, who is in the kingdom? The author and Jesus is providing a complete Legos. So, let's think about this, where he is going to go. You can guess where he is going to go. The reason you can guess where he is going to go is because Jesus was talking just a moment ago about children and purity. And what was the other big question? Children, purity, and my brain is fogged. Children, purity, the path, the foot causes you to sin. He was talking about going to Gehenna, causes the little ones to sin, your hand to sin, welcomes, receives the children, the man who was driving out demons, right? So that he told them, basically he told the disciples that you guys are evil and you're going to H-E double toothpicks because of what you're doing, right? So, if we're going to talk about children, what are you going to have to talk about? origin of children? Where did children come from? The stork. Remember, in the ancient world, sex is marriage. And marriage is sex. Vice versa. So the ancient world doesn't see a difference. For some reason, we decoupled these ideas. But that's in God's world. In God's world, that's insanity. In the ancient world, that's insanity. Because you can't decouple the two. But in any case, let's look at the words of the day really quickly. A-P-O-L-U-S-A-I. Apollousa. This is to loosen, to let off. This is translated to divorce, but it means, remember, okay, in the ancient world, marriage is sex and sex is marriage. In other words, when you're living together, in the ancient world, that is viewed as marriage. Now, we are going to talk a little bit more legalistically about it, but not as much as you think. This word E-X-E-S-T-I-N, exten, exten is a very interesting word. It's third person singular present indicative of a compound. John 11. It means basically the innie, the I. This is third person singular indicative, so we would say he, but it's the indicative. So it's a third person of I. How you can have that is a very difficult thing to explain in English. But in other words, it means the things that you or that you yourself should do or be. And it literally means, is it right? Is it right? Is it right? In other words, is it okay for me to do? That's third person indicative compound. Is it okay for me to do? And this is what we get to. So, with this in mind, because now we're ready. 2. Some Pharisees came and tested him by asking, eperiatio, to ask for. If they do not ask, is it lawful? They ask, is it extant, which in Greek means, is it right? Okay, what does this mean? Is it what kind of right? What are they asking? Are they asking, is it lawfully right?
Morally, right.
Morally or ethically?
Probably ethically.
Whose law?
They are not asking if it's lawfully right. If they ask that, that's not the word that's used. They are asking if it's morally and ethically right. Now, the difference between morality and ethics are cultural, okay? So they are asking if this, and by the way, this is a very specifically Greek term. Isn't it interesting the Pharisees are asking in a very specifically Greek way? Well, we'll see why they won't ask. They would never ask if it's lawfully right. We'll see why in just a second. Now, you got to understand this. Jesus, just before, went to the Pharisaic school of the Galil, remember, and had 2 words to tell them. Number 1, they asked him for a sign, and he said, I've been giving you signs, the unstated tells us, I've been giving you signs for 8 chapters, and you ain't got it. Are you stupid, right? Basically, that's smart. Okay, so these guys are a different school. What school are they? We went from the school of the Galil, and now we've moved down to Judea, and these guys have to be from the school of Jerusalem. Now, the difference between the Galil school and the Jerusalem school is this. And by the way, one of the huge questions in the rabbinic schools at this time, especially the fight between the Galil and the school of Jerusalem, was, can a man divorce his wife for any reason? The school of the Galil said, yes, for any reason. The school of Jerusalem said, no, you have to have a good reason. She has to burn your breakfast. Okay, so basically, you can guess, okay, if you're knowledgeable about this period, when you go to talk to Pharisees in the school of Jerusalem, what's the first question they're going to ask you? They're going to ask you a question that teases whether you are a member of the school of Gamaliel or the school of Jerusalem. Because they want to know which faction you're in, right? If you're Gamaliel, you'll say, of course, you can divorce her for any reason. And by the way, the word is apoluseai, you can loosen her. In other words, send her away from your household for any reason. If you're school of Jerusalem, you say, well, you got to have a reason. And basically, I'm making fun of them, but I will make more fun of them. The big reason they gave was adultery. But they're as bad as we are. Why I say they're as bad as we are? Because, you know, go look to see what the Small Catechism says about adultery. And we don't necessarily take it wrong because we take it from Jesus' words. Jesus said if you look on a woman wrong, you've committed adultery in your heart, right? Well, okay. Does that mean you guys should be wearing burqas? And I should be looking at, you know, I should never look at you, right? I mean, you go way far with this because we forget that Jesus liked to speak in paradox, right? Jesus literally didn't mean that if you glance at a woman, you've committed adultery, right? But what do you think the Jerusalem school's view is? If a woman happens to look at a man on the street, she's committed adultery in her heart, right? You see what I'm saying here? So even though there are specific differences, so therefore, what do we do to prevent that? We put them in a gynoeceum. Yeah, we throw them in the Greek gynoeceum, so that way they can't see men, you know, at all, that's the Greek view, right? So anyway, there's huge things and ramifications in this that have to do with the whole idea. But anyway, some Pharisees came and tested him, asking him, is it extant? Is it right? Not lawful. Is it right for a man to divorce, to fully free his wife? And Jesus said, what did Moses command? And literally, what did he intelomai? Intelomai. Intelomai. What did Moses intelomai? This is a stated telos.
So isn't that a law?
Yes, that is a law.
But you just said they weren't asking him whether it was lawful, and Christ says, what is the law of Moses?
Yes. Yes, exactly. Precisely. Yeah. Jesus took the question out of morality and asked what Moses concluded, right? There's no statement about the law here. Okay?
Well, except Jesus stated.
Well, what did they expect him to do? What did the rabbinic guys expect him to do? Where would they expect him to argue from? What point?
Gamaliel school.
Well, what would he use as his proof text?
Societal norms or?
Talmud and Mishnah. Mishnah is the unwritten Torah, and the Talmud is the commentary on the unwritten Torah. Because the law can't change, right? But the Talmud is the arguments behind the unwritten Torah, the Mishnah, that change. And this was not written down until about 100 AD by the Jerusalem school and by the school of Babylonia. So, it's not written down even. But they would expect Jesus to argue from the Talmud or the Mishnah, right? But instead, he did what?
Torah.
He just trumped them. This is like playing spades or playing like, what's it, at bridge, right? And you bring out your trump card. Boom! He brings out the Torah. They said, and you know, can you hear the disdain in their voice? Why is there disdain in their voice?
You really can't argue against it.
Well, you can't argue against it, so the only thing you can do is go into sarcasm, right? So they said, they epoed, not Lego, they epoed. Moses permitted eppitrail, literally he turned over. It's not permitted. They turned over, basically transferred a man to grapho, to write a biblion, a papyrus of aposteion, of separation, and send her away. Now already we have a little bit of a problem here. Does anybody get what the problem is here?
They reference precedents.
Well, the reason you got a little problem, because this is literally the way that it's interpreted by the Torah. But there's some really strong things here. For instance, number one, we write permitted, but what does it mean to transfer to a man, to transfer to a person? Moses did what?
Gave them the authority.
He punted, right? He punted. It doesn't say that Moses made it lawful or that Moses allowed it. It says he punted it to the husband, right? The husbands can make the decision. However, the husband has a problem because he has to grapho on papyrus. Now, they didn't say parchment, so they're saving money. But still, if you have to write something, what does it do to you? Costs big money. So in other words, the only people who can afford to do this are wealthy people. So a poor guy married to some woman, he can't afford, I mean, maybe he's saving for like 20 years to afford to divorce a woman. That sounds like a wild and bad thing. You should be buying fishing equipment or something, right? Or hunting equipment. It'd be better to have a tree stand than save up to divorce your wife, right? So, you know, already there are some pretty strong things here. And give her an epistana, separation, to send her away. Now the problem is that he can't fully free her. Why? What's the problem in Hebrew and even in Greek thought?
You might have to also return the bride price with her.
That's exactly right. You turn her back to her, you know, and I didn't go through all the marriage ways of marriage in this class. I probably won't, and maybe I'll have a time to. But the big deal here is, you know, for the wealthy and even for the middle class, the husband paid a bride price, or the bride brought value to him. And he is required by law, Jewish law specifically, to take care of that and increase its value. And then when she leaves, to give it to her. So, you know, what do you think? Okay, I'm going to have to give up half my vineyard, or I'm going to have to give up a lot of my property, or my sheep. Okay, you know, and then...
Maybe she's not so bad after all.
And then if I send it back to my father-in-law, what's my father may not go hunting and fishing with me anymore, right? I mean, this could be really bad, right? So I'm just saying, you know, we read these verses in modern culture because in modern culture we've made it easy to divorce people. I part with you and throw dog poop on your shoes and you're gone. Right? And our law basically supports that. It's amazing how easily people have made it to divorce. But even when Moses turned it over to the husband, the law makes it pretty difficult to divorce. Now, Greek culture is much different. And remember, Mark is writing to Greek culture. Now, the Greeks understand this, but not fully, right? They don't fully understand all the legality issues about what's going on with the Jews. But they still get it, that there are these requirements for divorce. And by the way, the Jewish would say what? What would they say? What would the Greeks say about compared to the Jews, do you think? We are more ethical and moral than these people because we keep our laws. You know, we don't dump our women, right? Because in the Greek culture, you know, I know we have this view of the Greek culture, and I don't know what their rates of, quote, divorces were, but I expect they weren't very high. Because if you divorce a Greek woman, especially if you're upper middle class, what would happen to you, do you think?
You might be ostracized.
Ostracized, but even worse, remember, they were either in their clans or outside their clans, the demos. And if you were in your demi and decided to divorce, and guess what? Now everybody in your demi is very unhappy with you. And if it's outside the demi, what do you think might happen to you? You're walking home from a symposium, strolling along a little bit drunk, and suddenly, right? Because you divorced the woman, the wife, right? Your wife. So, you know, we don't handle things culturally the way they did in the ancient world. The ancient world had a really, you know,
Blood feuds.
quick ways of handling these kind of problems, right? if the father didn't get you, then her brothers would probably take care of you, right? So anyway, nowadays we have the police, and police don't worry about adultery, so it's okay. So, you know. In any case, this is from Mark 4:10, is from Deuteronomy 24:1. If a man marries a woman who becomes displeasing to him because he finds something indecent about her, he writes her a certificate of divorce, gives it to her, and sends her away from his house. And if she leaves his house, she becomes the wife. And if after she leaves his house, she becomes the wife of another man, and her second husband dislikes her and writes her a certificate of divorce, gives it to her, and sends her from the house, or if he dies, then her first husband who divorced her is not allowed to marry her again after she's been defiled. That would be detestable in the eyes of the Lord. Do not bring sin upon the land of the Lord your God is giving you as an inheritance. There's more to this. You can read it yourself. By the way, I'll just note that, look in 6, it says, don't take a pair of millstones. Not even the upper one is security for a debt. But Jesus said, take the millstones and use them to drown the bad guys who would teach the young ones, little ones, anything impure. 5, it was because your hearts were stelicardia. They were dry, not hard. Usually it uses, not pericardia, what's the word for, it's same word in Greek as in English, to harden, to fossilize.
Sclero?
No, this is dry heart. The usual one is a P, pH. pH. What's the word for porocardia? Porocardia. Stone heart. Your heart of stone, right? That's usually translated hard heart. This is not. It says your hearts were dry. That Moses wrote you this in Torah, this stated law. Jesus replied, an epo. And by the way, it's interesting, because, remember, Moses didn't make the law, right? But Jesus is specifically saying that he punted to the husband because your hearts were dry. So, kind of interesting. So 6, at the beginning, in the arche of creation, the kistis, the original formation, God made them male, Aaron. Aaron, male, means stronger for lifting, literally in the Greek, and female, theles, one who suckles babes. I think it's interesting that the Greek is very specific, made them male, one good for lifting, and female for childbirth, suckling the babes, okay? Because the reason is we're talking about purity and origins. So, and that's the beginning of heaven and earth, that's from Genesis 1:27. 27, so God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him, male and female, he created them. And then in 7, for this reason, literally, hinike, on account of, a man will leave, literally, kapaleo, he will downleave his father and mother and be united, proskoleo, stick to his wife. Genesis 24, Genesis 2:24. For this reason, a man will leave his father and mother, united his wife, they will become one flesh. In 8, and the two will become one sarx. The two will become one sarx, so they are no longer two, but they are sarx, and they are ishad. Ishad as God is ishad. The Lord your God is ishad. The same word is used in the Hebrew for man and a woman will become one. So therefore, if they are one flesh, can't be separated. Therefore, what God has joined together, 9, literally, suge sinuni, yoked together. Therefore, what God has yoked together, let man not put space between. Now, I know this doesn't make everybody happy, probably, but you'll go back and you'll say, well, let's look at Matthew, because Matthew gives a little bit more leeway. But there ain't no leeway in Mark. 10, when they were in the house again, the disciples asked Jesus about this. Why do you think they asked Jesus about this?
They didn't get it the first time.
They didn't get it the first time. Now you'd ask,
Or they didn't like his answer.
or they didn't like his answer. They didn't like his answer. I'll take both. I think that's a great answers. I don't think they got it, and I don't think they liked his answer. Because, you know, they wanted to what? All men want the punt. I want to make the decision, right? Yeah, if she burns dinner, I mean, like, she's gone. And Jesus said to your sarks, you're the same sarks. This is, okay, now, the Hebrews are going to gyrate about this, but what do you think the Greeks and the Romans are thinking right now? They're loving it. They're loving it because, you know, basically, remember, marriage is sex and sex is marriage. And Jesus just gave them a what kind of answer? What is this? This is what we call a beautiful, logical reason for the perfection of male and female being one in a marriage relationship, because they become one. This is huge in their viewpoint. And not only that, well, you know, if it reminds the Hebrews back of their roots, that's pretty cool too. But remember, the Romans and the Greeks are grasping for what? What do they want?
Solid answers.
They want solid, logical answers. And Jesus just gave them one that is wonderfully solid, that speaks directly to their suke and to their pneuma. And they say, they're the same sarks, right? So, he answered. They asked Jesus about this, and he answered. He legoed. Remember? He didn't lego to the Pharisees. He's legoing to the disciples. So here's the lego. Anyone who divorces frees fully his wife and marries in gameo, has sex with. Listen to me. This is what the Greek says. It doesn't say marry. It says has sex with, because sex is marriage is sex in the ancient world. So it says, anyone who divorces frees fully his wife and has sex with another woman, and a woman is added with another, commits adultery. Moicheo. This is adultery in the Greek. The word's used is either a female or male paramour. It can be either one, but literally is a male paramour. It's basically saying something really horrible about what a man is doing. In the modern world, we made sex a sport. The Greek is very specific. And marriage is sex and sex is marriage. Jesus just said, if you have sex with another person, you just committed adultery. I don't know if they get this either. And if she divorces her husband and marries another man, man is added, and marries another, so it could be a man or woman, I guess. The ancient world, you couldn't marry a person with a different sex because you could not have sex. You
couldn't procreate.
We've defined sex in a certain way in our culture. And Bill Clinton defines sex differently than most of us. And most of your children may define sex differently than you think it should be. Right? But the sexual act is a specific thing between males and females. It doesn't include anybody else. Anything else is kind of, I'm not sure what to call it, but you know, you can call it what you want, but without procreation, you know, this is what we're talking. Marriage is sex, sex is marriage. But notice that Jesus, it doesn't say with a woman or with a man, but literally if you have sex with another person, you know, it could be the way you're looking at this. If she divorces her husband and marries another, she commits adultery. Same words. Same words here. Basically, he shut up the Pharisees, he shut up the disciples. I don't know if the disciples still got it, but Jesus is pretty much laying it out here, right? And you notice there's no stated telos. There's no stated telos. He gives them a logical argument. This time his argument is from what standpoint? Basically the law, right? Because it doesn't say, well, okay, the law. And by the way, we're going to see more of this. We're going to see a lot more of this. If we're talking about purity, what does the Hebrew say purity is? Keeping the law, right? And so the first question that we get asked, remember, the child is pure, and the salt won't lose its flavor, and therefore the question is then of the origin of children. and origin of children is pure. The point that Jesus is getting to here, though, is we are beginning to see the definition of purity. So therefore, the definition of adultery. There's nothing wrong with marriage, right? The problem is not with marriage. The problem is with doing things outside of the marriage relationship. That's the point.
Lionel, was there a lawful provision for a wife to divorce a husband?
Not really. But you can guess how it worked, right?
She can make it pretty tough on him.
She can make it pretty tough on him and say, and bring him the parchment and say, look, I've got the piece of paper right here, and I'm tired of you, and you're out of here, and I want my goods, and my dad says he'll take me back, and I promise you won't kill you, not next week anyway, right? So, I mean, you can see how this could work. So yeah, but there's huge incentives. Merrick, there are huge incentives for men not to divorce their wives in the ancient world, and really, we de-incentivize that, no fault divorce, so, you get yours, I get mine, the children get nothing. We've got all kinds of ways of doing business that, have really made divorce a very easy thing, potentially easy thing in our culture. And I don't want to argue about, the semantics of that because, people will say, well, but I'm just saying in the ancient world, the ancient world looked at it, marriage and sex, as a very specific thing. Now, there are lots of prostitution going on around there, right? Lots of prostitution. And the ancient world, there were concubines. So you guys, if you were wealthy enough, might have had a concubine and sent her out to work.
Herod's going to love this. John the Baptist
called
him on it.
And yes, John the Baptist called him on it. And Jesus is calling people on it. Now, I know that people will go then and, I'm going to go look at Matthew instead of Mark to see what Jesus says there. And that's okay. But Mark, and why do you think it's really important to Mark? What is so important to Mark to ensure this demarcation? Whose audience is Mark?
Greeks and Romans.
Greeks and Romans. And we know the Greeks and Romans, in the Hebrew world, it's a little more difficult to divorce your wife, right? But if you look, and I'll argue this very easily, every single letter of Paul we've looked at, what was one of the main problems with the congregation? Sexual immorality was a problem. And it was the Greeks and Romans that he was mostly writing to, right? They had a problem because even though in their cultures it was, they had this view, still they had other ways of getting around it. In the French culture, it's not unusual for men to have mistresses. Their cultures handle things differently. I'm glad we don't have that yet in our culture, but who knows what we're going to have in our culture in the future. I mean, with half the people having venereal disease, I don't know how we're going to have babies that are viable, but this is, I don't know. Anyway, now look what it goes to in 13. This is not a segue, guys. People were bringing Prosperio, bearing toward him little children, paedon, childlings, to Jesus to have him hug them. Haptomai, hug them. Not touch them, to hug them. But the disciples rebuked. They epimeo, they taxed on them. Last time, what did the disciples do? They didn't tax on them. They didn't epimeo. What did they do? They prevented them. Right? They prevented them. Well, now the disciples think it's okay to rebuke, but we just can't prevent. I don't know what's going through this guy's mind. What did Jesus tell them the last time they tried to prevent children from coming to him?
Going to hell.
Don't do this.
You're going to hell. You're literally going to Gehenna. Cut your arms off, cut your legs off, cut your eyes out, because you're preventing the pure from coming to me. Right? Now, we've got to figure it out. We've thought this through. We've logoed it. We can't prevent them, but we should rebuke them. Okay, I don't know about you, but, this is quite obvious to me that Jesus is going,
Seen and not.
Maybe he's doing it to the disciples. I'd be doing it to the disciples. Poof, poof, Peter's got hand marks on his head, right? How stupid can you get? I mean, this wasn't even a chapter ago, hardly, right? And they were completely rebuked. But you notice where this takes place. Mark introduces the idea of children and purity, castigates the disciples, threatens them with hell, and being killed, having a millstone put around your neck. Then we go to sex and marriage, basically the origin of children, right? And Jesus makes it very clear where he stands on that. And then what do we segue back into? The Logos about children. This is just, you couldn't have a more beautiful way of putting together a logical argument in this sense. So we came back to children. 14. When Jesus saw this, okay, it says indignant. It doesn't say that in the Greek. It says anakateo. He was filled with grief. Why was he filled with grief? Yeah, he already told them you're going to hell for doing this before. I mean, what do you not get, you guys? I mean, this is like, vacuous, right? You look in their ears and the light shines on the other side. You use a candle to see if there's anything between them, right? Now, we can laugh about this, but the biggest thing I would worry about, that maybe we're like this. I mean, maybe we're not getting it either, right? In our culture.
Well,
Yeah.
Lionel, I mean, I'm not disagreeing with your conclusion.
Yeah.
But at the same time, cut them a little slack in that maybe they are trying to give Christ a break. I mean, he's surrounded by crowds. They've got all these people and they're saying, I know we're not sure who you are, but you're walking with us. You've got limitations. We don't understand that you don't have limitations, and we're trying to protect you. I mean, all I'm saying is that
maybe
best intentions gone awry.
Well, if my boss came to me and said, let the little children come to me because if you don't, you're going to hell. And knowing you're going to hell, you got to cut your arm off and you pull your eye out. I would be like, okay, I'm going to bring children to this guy, right?
Yeah.
And look what happens. When Jesus saw us, he was indignant. He was filled with grief. And he said to them, can you see him saying this? Let the little children come. Right? It's not come. It's apithemi. Send them to me. Send them. Before he didn't say send them, he said bring them, right? And now he says send them. So in other words, he's correcting the disciples. In the Greek, we in English just translate it the same way, same words. But in the Greek, to the Greek readers, it would have been very obvious, or hearers, it would have been very obvious, that the first time Jesus thought he got it right, but they interpreted, bring them, they interpreted send them being, right, well, just don't hinder them, right? And now they're rebuking. And now Jesus says, bring them to me.
What part of no didn't you understand?
Yeah, can you imagine this? Before the disciples are like, what are we running, a preschool here or something, right? And Jesus said, yeah, come on, we're in a preschool. It's like, I just, yeah, I want to come slack, but I can't come any slack. Jesus isn't cutting any slack. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, but isn't this all counterculture to them?
Yes.
Children would be there. It is very difficult for any of us to go against our culture.
Yes, it is counterculture. However, it is also remember, if Jesus is the Christus, it means he is the what? High priest and king, right? And what's the job of your retainers if you're high priest and king? You do what?
Obey.
Well, you not only obey, but you do what? You keep the bad guys, you keep the lower people away, right, from the priest and king. So, hey, we're the disciples, and we're going to be Jesus' right and left hand, right? And we're going to run Jerusalem, right? And so Jesus is our king and high priest, and you can't come near him, right? You're just some snotty kid. Well, and really, children, remember, children are viewed by the Greeks and Romans as barbarians. They can't speak, right? And by the Hebrews, they're unlearned. They have no value. They have value to the parents, but they have no value in the culture. So why would you bring children? What's good as children? Jesus flipped it on its head because he said the children are pure. They're the ones in the kingdom of heaven, right? And that's the whole point. That's the whole point. And so the children and the parents are bringing the children to Jesus. Why do you think they're bringing them to Jesus?
To get their minds right?
Well, there's a beautiful thing. He says, do not hinder them, do not stop them, for the kingdom of God belongs to them. It belongs to them. 15, the bell is going to ring very soon here, but I'm going to skip to 16 because of what you just said. He took them, he embraced them. He literally embraced the children in his arms. He placed his hands on them and down legoed. Kata legoed. Kata legeo. Kata legeo. What's lego? Means to
Argue.
logical argument, right? Logic. What does kata mean? Anyone remember?
From?
Close. Down. Down. Now, it's translated in the NIV as, this is the word I'm going to give you next week, so anyway, I'm precursor, but it says he blessed them. The word is kato logeo. Kato logeo. He down lego. What does that mean to down lego?
He framed his argument in a way that they could understand.
He framed his argument in a way that they could understand. He didn't bless them. He made it so that the children could understand his argument. To me, this is foundational. Why did the people bring the children to Jesus? Because he could explain how to be convinced to their minds. Like a children's sermon, right? See? This is the beauty of both Jesus and the Greek. In other words, Jesus is making the gospel accessible to whom?
Everybody.
To the children, children who can't speak, hardly, right? To everyone. And apparently the gospel is a lot about hugging, which is kind of cool. But,
Love. He
well,
demonstrated it.
they don't have any love in their culture, not in that sense. They're a
It's a
pew.
demonstration.
They're a pew. Thank you, Father, for your word. We pray you look after us this week. In your name we pray.